right. Well, welcome to Pondering Easter in the 21st Century with Joseph Campbell. Uh, the Just a few remarks, and then I'm going to. Joseph Campbell's part of the trio. I'm part of the trio, and Carol Cook, uh, our resident theologian, is going to join in, and we're going to hand the ball back and forth, uh, and so you'll hear from Joseph Campbell. Uh, this about it was about 3 months ago that I came upon an interview with Joseph Campbell that was in the New York Times magazine in 1979, and that created quite a stir. uh, by the way, everything that we're talking about today, and including a link so you can go to the New York Times, what they call time machine, because this was before they were digital, and you could read the whole thing, and I really recommend that. It's rich, and Carol and I have been uh, uh, pondering this, and that's the key word in the title. We've been pondering it together for more than a month now, and today will be the fruits of that because we both wanted to do something significant about Easter. Easter is more than green plastic grass and eggs and and mattress sales. We really wanted to do something for a group this deep that befitted this mystery, and it is a great mystery, and that's where pondering comes in. Uh, there's a line in the Gospel of Luke that sets this up. When Mary was trying to deal with the mother of Jesus, was trying to deal with this, what her son had become, and then what happened to him, which was at the foot of the cross. Luke said, Mary pondered these mysteries in the silence of her heart. And so pondering is it's a different faculty. It can't be found in the left brain for those of you who have done some of the whole brain studies. Pondering is strictly a right brain activity, as is meditation. But pondering is what you do with a question, with a mystery that you just cannot work out with the left brain. And Easter, I've been through 70 liturgical calendars and 70 Holy Weeks since I was a 6-year old going into Catholic school. So I've been through this 70 times, and it keeps coming back. It's coming back for 2,000 years, this mystery, this myth. And myth doesn't, and Carol will bring in a lot of the Campbell quotes from this, so you'll be able to listen to Joseph Campbell. And myths. People think myths are not true or they're made up or something, but no, myths are a kind of deeper truth, and Campbell will talk about that. And they last. Something's been around for 2,000 years. There's something to it, whether you're Christian or not. The same with all the traditions and all the spiritual, the ones that are still around. There's something there. We might have gone to sleep on it. So. That's what we're going to do. And there's been a lot of things happening in the last couple of weeks, including today, that confirm what we're doing. I want you to take a look on this before I take the screensaver off. And I'm going to, if I have time, I'm going to bring it back for our third period of meditation. But the central icon there of the resurrection is very different from the way it's Greek Orthodox, it's Eastern Christianity. The ones that you see that were done in Western Europe, on the Roman view, very different. This one, in the Roman icons, it's Jesus busting out of the tomb. There's maybe a centurion that's blinded by the light, and that's it. Jesus is risen. But in the East, they see it as a community affair, a corporate affair, and the woman on Jesus's left is Eve, and the old guy on Jesus's right that he has his hands to is Adam, and he's bringing, yesterday in the medieval lore, on Holy Saturday, Jesus descends into hell, into darkness, and we've all been there in this lifetime. We go into those periods where nothing makes sense and it's all dark. Well, he descended into hell, and then on Easter, he brings up all those people that were living there, because from a medieval view, anybody who lived before the gospel couldn't be saved. Well, he's pulling everybody in, and you see all those faces around him of the saints, and it's so resurrection is for everybody. I love that view of resurrection that comes from our Greek and Russian folks. That resurrection is just not about one guy 2,000 years ago. It's about you right now. It's about everybody. No exceptions, and it doesn't have to be within a Christian context. You know, uh, I'm looking out the window now. The tops of the trees are green, you see. Yeah, that's why it's at this time. So I'm going to take the screensaver off and hand it off to my another member of the trio, Carol Cook, and she's going to take it from here.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a exceptionally beautiful spring morning here in Louisville, Kentucky, and I hope it's beautiful wherever you are today. Um, I still am one of those old-fashioned people who subscribes to the print version of the Sunday New York Times, and this was the front page of today's paper, which, as you notice, matches what Joe showed from the original 1968 views of the Earth from space. The lead article, I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs because it seemed too serendipitous. That we had, as Joe said, we started talking about this a couple of months ago and had no idea then that there would be a trip to the moon when we were actually talking about this. So the two paragraphs from the New York Times say the first time human beings flew to the moon, it came at the end of a rotten year. It was 1968 that these photos were taken, December 21. War, political violence, racial strife, protesters in the streets. It felt like everything was coming unraveled. Yet when Apollo 8 splashed down, it proved so inspiring that one American summed up the feeling with a telegram thanking the astronauts, "You saved 1968." 58 years later, another American spacecraft hurtled toward the heavens last week to begin a journey back to the moon amid deep divisions at home. For a brief moment, the talk was again about courage, exploration, national ambition, and common purpose. But it was no fault of the four astronauts of Artemis II that the planet they left behind remains riven by war, strife, and violence, or that 2026 has not as yet been saved. Um, as I said, my name is Carol Cook, and I've been coming to these heart-to-heart Zoom meetings since almost the beginning. But unlike so many of you who are brave and generous speakers, I prefer to stay pretty much in the background. Only Joe could have pulled me out of my relative hiding to speak on this Easter Sunday. To help frame my pondering, I want to say a little bit about my religious background. I come out of the Reformed Church in America, which is very similar to the larger and more well-known Presbyterian Church, except it was originally ethnically Dutch rather than Scottish Presbyterian. My father was a pastor and then a seminary professor in the Reformed Church, and from the age of 10, I grew up in Holland, Michigan, one of the national centers of the denomination. It's probably better known for its annual Tulip Time Festival in May. I'm grateful for many aspects of my religious upbringing, and I feel that I probably experienced the best of my tradition, that my tradition has to offer. But as time passed, I've also become more aware of its limitations. Because of my parents' level of education, faith commitments, and appreciation of poetry, I did not grow up with a fundamentalist, literalist interpretation of the Bible. And happily, that has been true of my own ongoing education and participation in church. So, Joseph Campbell's emphasis on myth and symbols as the special language of religious experience is not a huge stretch for me. What is a stretch for me is to move more fully beyond the historicity of some of the biblical stories and decades of a church-focused Lent and Easter season, some parts of which I still find meaningful and beautiful, to the kind of questions we are pondering this morning. What does Holy Week, the crucifixion, and resurrection mean spiritually to me and to you? I understand what Campbell means when he says that in general, institutionalized religions have not allowed symbols to speak directly to people in their proper sense. When you translate the Bible with excessive literalism, the possibility of a convincing reference to the individual's own spiritual experience is lost. As a 6 on the Enneagram, it's easier for me to stay in my head and think about Easter than it is to ponder how it impacts my heart. I really appreciate and am challenged by Campbell naming Easter as a symbol that allows us to enter emotionally into contact with our deepest selves, with each other, and with God, a word that is also to be understood as a symbol. An awareness of mythical truth alerts us to the fact that in the Easter experience, we do not just remember historical events, but we are experiencing in ourselves Passover and Easter. Joe?
Okay. Well, that gives us a bit of Campbell and a bit to work with. And so we're just going to try to start with 5 minutes of silence to ponder and or write on our first question, which is just sort of a baseline question. And it's about you. It's not about Carol I or Joseph Campbell. It's about you. And the question is, what is your current spiritual experience of Easter, of Holy Week, the crucifixion, and resurrection? So that's the question to ponder. And to ponder is we'll just sit in silence and just hold the question. Meister Eckhart, one of the great mystics in the Christian tradition, he said, "There's nothing so like God as silence." So we're actually going into the silence with this question and just hold it and then see what happens. You
Excuse
know,
me, Joe. Can you repeat the question? Just one.
yes,
Thank you.
I am going to do it. Thanks, Vivian. What is your current spiritual experience of Easter? So we're talking about the experience of Easter. Uh, and it could be any experience. It's just yours. That's the baseline we're trying to get with this first question. Your current spiritual experience of Easter, and that includes Holy Week, the crucifixion and resurrection, all those symbols that are part of Easter. Okay, and we'll spend 5 minutes in silence, just holding the question. And if words come from it, you can write, and that'll be the format for all three of the ponderings here of the three parts is you could write or just sit and listen and just see what your experience is. So I'm going to start the timer. You don't have to worry about time. For now, we'll go into the silence. What is your current spiritual experience of Easter, including Holy Week, crucifixion, and resurrection? Those three symbols. Okay. And now, as always, is a little different because we're not just listening to it talk straight. As always, though, at least today, to feel free to jot anything that comes to you. But we're going to move on to the second part, which is Carol's going to sort of feed into our hearts Joseph Campbell's view of the crucifixion, something that actual event that happened over 2,000 years ago, but it's a symbol. People wear that, the symbol of the cross, which, by the way, was not the first symbol of Christianity, came much later. But Campbell on the crucifixion will be interesting and will open up your mind, perhaps, and hearts to different views. So Carol will do that for us now, and then we'll ponder that. So go
Well,
ahead.
I don't know about you all, but I carry a lot of baggage with me around about the crucifixion. I hated the story as a child, and I pretty much still do. The way the cross has been used as a symbol for imperial Christianity, is deeply, deeply troubling. So I have always struggled to find a way to engage this symbol in some kind of helpful way, which is why I returned to Cynthia Bourgeault's Parable of the Acorn that Joe will read in a few minutes as one way I could ponder death in a less traumatic way. So these are some of I'm just going to read two paragraphs from this essay that gives you a sense of how Campbell sees the mystical meaning of the crucifixion and ways he believes it can refer immediately to ourselves. So here we have Campbell. If we think of the crucifixion only in historical terms, we lose the reference of the symbol immediately to ourselves. Jesus left his mortal body on the cross, the sign of the earth, to go to the Father with whom he was one. We similarly are to identify with the eternal life that is within us. The symbol at the same time tells us of God's willing acceptance of the cross. That is to say, participation in the trials and sorrows of human life in the world, so that he is here within us, not by way of a fall or a mistake, but with rapture and joy. Thus, the cross has a dual sense: one, our going to the divine, and the other, the coming of the divine to us. It is a true crossing. What has always been basic to resurrection or Easter is crucifixion. If you want to resurrect, you must have crucifixion. I really hate some of this. Too many interpretations of the crucifixion have failed to emphasize that. They emphasize the calamity of the event. And if you emphasize calamity, then you look for someone to blame. That is why people have blamed the Jews for it. But it is not a calamity if it leads to new life. Through the crucifixion, we were unshelled. We were able to be born to resurrection. That is not a calamity. We must look freshly at this so that its symbolism can be sensed.
All right. Well, uh, I remember asking my favorite grade school teacher, Sister James Siddell, on Good Friday. I said, Sister, I said, why do they call it Good Friday? It doesn't seem so good to me. And she says, well, Joseph, uh, it is a great mystery and we must ponder it, but no Good Friday, no Easter. And for me, I was thinking, well, no chocolate. But and if for those of you who have worked with the mandala, which is a Tibetan way of mapping this, the Holy Week, really, we had the order on Holy Thursday, the new commandment, love one another as I love you, Maundy Thursday, as it's called. So that was the new order. Next day, it all falls apart. So that's disorder, on the mandala. So from order to disorder. And then in our opening image, we had, on Holy Saturday, the part of the symbol was on Holy Saturday, he descends into hell, into the darkness. And that's the darkness of that third part on the mandala, which is emptiness. If you're going to go this whole way to something new, you have to go through disorder and then darkness, emptiness. Darkness, emptiness, it just means I don't know what to do with it. My left brain doesn't know what to do with it, you see. And then the fourth part would be the new order. That's, no Good Friday, no Easter, no Holy Saturday, no Easter either. Yeah. So here's a parable of the acorn, which sort of catches it. Cynthia Bourgeault has it in her first book, and I'm going to read it to you. It's another, and this will be an intro. So let this be part of our going into meditation here, into pondering. And she nicked this from Jacob Needleman in a book that was called Lost Christianity, which is a great book, actually, how we've lost the thread of this whole thing. So, anyway, once upon a time, in a not so far away land, there was a kingdom of acorns nestled at the foot of a grand old oak tree. Since the citizens of this kingdom were modern, fully westernized acorns, they went about their business with profound energy. And since they were midlife baby boomer acorns, they engaged in a lot of self help courses. There were seminars called Getting All You Can Out of Your Shell. There were woundedness and recovery groups for acorns who had been bruised in their original fall from the tree. There were spas for oiling and polishing those shells and various acornopathic therapies to enhance longevity and well being. One day, in the midst of this kingdom, there suddenly appeared a naughty little stranger who must have been dropped out of the blue by a passing bird. He was capless and dirty, making an immediate negative impression on his fellow acorns. And crouched beneath the oak tree, he stammered out a wild tale. Pointing upward at the oak tree, he said, We are that. Delusional thinking, obviously, the other acorns concluded. But one of them continued to engage him in conversation. So tell us how we would become that tree. Well, said the acorn, pointing downward, it has something to do with going into the ground and cracking open the shell. Insane, they responded. Totally morbid. Why, then we wouldn't be acorns anymore. Ponder that. We'll take 5 minutes. Thou art that. So the question is, how does the symbol of crucifixion resonate with your heart? And you can include the parable of the acorn. It's that? It's the same symbol. It goes down into the ground and dies. That's how you become a mighty oak tree. Something else. Ponder that. See what comes. Just your experience. Can't be right or wrong. Of course, keep writing. It's always polite to write today. Um, Part three is we'll bring in Campbell's symbolic take and experience on the resurrection. And if we have time, we'll actually bring somebody back from the dead who died in 1968 to lead us into our third pondering. Yeah, so this symbol of resurrection, the new life, the new order, and uh, Carol's going to take us there.
And just a foot aside to say that, we are not alone and deeply struggling with the meaning of these practices, beliefs, whatever you want to call them. I, I mean, one of the good things about my theological education has been to see how deeply others have wrestled with all of this and some of the amazing wisdom that has come out of those reflections, that are not represented in Campbell. So we're not putting Campbell forward as the interpretation of it all, but it's a challenging one. So I'm just going to read through a few of the statements Campbell makes about Easter and Earthrise. And you can also, I think this is where the mystic in him really soars. He's not one to hang out in grief and loss and death and sorrow. He really wants to move on to joy and new life. So here we go. We are, according to many observers, at a turning point in religious consciousness. That is, the mythological structure or the legends that undergirded a literal biblical interpretation of the universe are sharply challenged by the discoveries of the space age. In 1969, we had the great symbol of a change that has taken place. Men stood on the moon and looked back, and by television, we were able to look back with them to see Earth rise. That is the symbol that enabled us to feel the truth of the discovery that Copernicus made 4.25 centuries ago. With the moonwalk, with our view of Earthrise, we could see that the earth and the heavens were no longer divided, but that the earth is in the heavens. Easter and Passover offer the perfect symbols because they mean that we are called to a new life. This new life is not very well defined. That is why we want to hold on to the past. The journey to this new life, and it is a journey we must all make, cannot be made unless we let go of the past. The reality of living in space means that we are born anew, not born again to an old-time religion, but to a new order of things. There are no horizons in space, and there can be no horizons on our own experience. We cannot hold to ourselves and our in-groups as we once did. The space age makes that impossible, but people reject this demand or don't want to think about it. So they pull back into one true church or black power or the unions or the capitalist class. The exclusivism of there being only one way in which we can be saved, the idea that there is a single religious group that is in sole possession of the truth, that is the world as we know it that must pass away. What is the kingdom? It lies in our realization of the ubiquity of the divine presence in our neighbors, in our enemies, in all of us. The central demand is to surrender our exclusivity, everything that defines us over against each other. The kingdom is here. It does not come through expectation. One looks at the world and sees the radiance. The Easter revelation is right there. We don't have to wait for something to happen. The mystical theme of the space age is this: the world as we know it is coming to an end. The world as the center of the universe, the world divided from the heavens, the world bound by horizons in which love is reserved for members of the in-group. That is the world that is passing away. And finally, he ends with the poetry of existence, a phrase I love. Earthrise is like all symbols. They resemble compasses. One point is in a fixed place, but the other moves to the unknown. The fear of the unknown, this free fall into the future, can be detected all around us. But we live in the stars, and we are finally moved by awe to our greatest adventures. The kingdom of God is within us. Easter and Passover particularly remind us that we have to let go in order to enter it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Carol, for reading it in and for choosing those. There was so much to read in Campbell in this interview, and I hope you will read the interview. Now, we do have enough time to bring somebody who died on December 10th, 1968, that year, into our conversation, and that's Thomas Merton. Uh, Toynbee, who wrote the 16-volume history of the world back in the 50s, a British guy, or I think it's like from 50s to 70s that he wrote this thing. But he said something remarkable one time. He said, "What will be remembered about the 20th century will not be either World War and will not be, I mean, what will be the significant point of it, of the 20th century, will not be the two world wars, nor the dropping of the atomic bomb." He thought that the significant event, the world changing event that happened, was the meeting of Buddhism and Christianity, the meeting of these two deep mystical religions. And on, a month before Merton died in Bangkok, and a lot of people chalk Merton off because he was going into the East, opening up interspiritual dialogue with the Dalai Lama and others to talk to all different types. They thought that he had lost his faith, or he had gone beyond the pale, which he had. But he was pushing the horizon, you see. And a month before he died, exactly on November 10th, he had finished his third talk with the Dalai Lama. There's that picture of him that I have up that's famous. And then he goes to Bangkok to talk to a bunch of Asian monastics just right next door to the Vietnam War. Uh, and capitalism, communism, it was a hot issue. And he gave a talk, which was not all that well received, uh, because he was saying we can learn from all this stuff. And you could see it was lucky because it was the only talk he ever gave that was ever filmed or recorded. And we're going to have a piece of music to lead us in. We're going to take 10 minutes, and the first 5 minutes are going to be this piece of music where Merton, we hear his last words. The only time he was recorded that way. So that'll be our intro. But our question, the third question, is this feeling of resurrection. As I was listening to Carol read, I was jotting down. Uh, well, actually, this was in the crucifixion part. I was during crucifixion. I was jotting down Gaza, uh, Haiti, these, and then I got more personal, and I really looked at my two crucifixion periods where uh, the times our marriage fell apart. Pam and I just fell apart twice. Those were times of the cross. Those were dark times for both of us, and here we are. So Gaza can come back. Haiti can come back. I mean, the Asians and the God and the Palestinians in general, these are Good Friday people. They're Easter people too, because they keep going. They're not giving up. So resurrection comes in. And so we'll start with 5 minutes of Merton and then 5 minutes of writing, and then we'll go into our community discussion. You have to listen closely. I wish they would have toned the music down a little bit more when Merton's speaking, but we'll start with it anyway and see what you can get. It's Merton's last take on all of this stuff. He was only 52. I have to set it up so we can hear it here. Okay, enjoy. And we'll have 10 minutes. You'll have 5 minutes after the recording. And you can get this recording. All this music we had before, and this one will be in the notes, and you can find it yourself. This is called Shining Like the Sun.
It's obvious that we have to plan the future. The essential of life is not embedded in buildings, it's not embedded in clothing, it's not embedded in necessarily even a rule. But it is somewhere along the line in something deeper than a role. It is somewhere concerned with this business of total inner transformation, and all other things serve that end. If you once penetrate by detachment and purity of heart to the inner secret of the ground of one's ordinary experience, you attain to a liberty which nobody can touch, which nobody can affect. This kind of freedom and transcendence are somehow attainable. Detachment and purity of heart to the inner secret of the ground of one's ordinary experience, you attain to a liberty which nobody can touch, which nobody can affect. This kind of freedom and transcendence are somehow attainable. The whole idea of compassion is based on a keen awareness of the interdependence of all these living beings, which are all part of one another and all involved in one another. The whole purpose of life is to live by love.